Faster than a fraudulent performance measure, stronger than a misplaced decimal point, able to leap complex compliance requirements at a single bound. It's Super Auditor! Welcome, ladies and gentlemen, to Auditors Save the World, one audit project at a time, where we bring you thrilling tales of daring audits and brave financial reviews. Here, our heroes don't wear capes, but they do wield the power of empirical evidence. Brought to you by the pros at Yellowbook-CPE. In each episode, we interview those legendary auditors who have truly rescued the day. Stay tuned, listeners, because this is one story you won't want to miss. And folks, don't forget to subscribe to our show in your podcast app of choice. And now, here's your host, Lita Hart-Fanta.
In a world where data can make or break the dreams of our furry friends, one hero saw what others missed. Meet Micheal, a keen-eyed champion who spotted a blip in licensing data that others overlooked. But he didn't stop there. With sharp instincts and a heart for paws, he made game-changing recommendations that unlocked a wave of new funding for puppies and kitties across the city. So how'd he do it? Get ready, because Micheal is here to tell you his tail-wagging and perfect story.
I was in the city of Winnipeg, the city auditor's office from 2008 till 2020. And
okay.
I was deputy at the time, deputy city auditor.
Oh.
And I had a number of questions about, like, how much value are we providing here? Are we really doing the best thing for the people that we're working with? Is it making an impact? What does it look like from the other side? I've always wondered as an auditor going, like, we really are someone coming from the outside and looking in, but what does it look like when you're on the inside? Are we actually making the connection there? And that's really what inspired me to, like, this position came up in business architecture, which I didn't know anything about before. While I was in audit, like, I'd never heard anything about it before, but looked at the job description and saw there was a huge overlap with what we did in a performance audit in terms of when you're gathering that knowledge of client business up front and mapping everything out and saying, how does this all work?
Yeah.
That essentially was business architecture.
Neat.
And I said, well, let's give this a roll and see what it looks like from the other side. To walk a mile in someone else's shoes, essentially, right?
Yeah. Yeah. Are you going to come back to audit, you think, or just stay on that?
I would love to get into an audit role again one day. Yes.
You would? Okay.
It's like you can't shake it, right? Like, I spent 16 years in audit, 4 of which were in getting my CPA, the Canadian equivalent of a CPA up here.
Nice. Yeah.
In public sector, and then 12 in a municipal auditor's office. So yeah, I really do love, especially performance audit.
Oh yeah, so you want to get back?
Yeah, I'd like to.
Huh. So business architecture, your job is to take special assignments when something is new in the city or something's not functioning well in the city, or do you do a risk assessment and choose who to go help when you do business architecture?
That's great. That's such a great auditor question. Do we do a risk assessment, right?
Yeah.
And what it is it all depends. And I'm sure in your years in auditing, you would have seen various organizations that had different maturity levels on what their, just this, what the documentation was around what the services were that they provided, how everything fit in. And that's really what business architecture is that you're mapping out those elements of a business or of an organization where you're saying, well, what is the service that we're providing?
Yeah.
And what are the value streams or the processes that we're providing that through? How does that link to strategy? How does my strategy impact that? What capabilities do we need to provide that? It's all that kind of stuff.
Well, that sounds great.
And even within a city, you can see some parts of the city have that well-defined and some are lesser defined. So
yeah.
Because
of length of time they've been working on it, who's running the place, how sophisticated they are as far as their understanding of controls and processes, and their willingness to change, I guess, or innovate.
Even backgrounds, because in a lot of public service, you can see people that come up through various streams and they get to be a manager because they were good at what they were doing, right? So you have someone who was a firefighter who was good at being a firefighter, and then they get thrown into a management position. You go, well, what background did they have in that? Right? How are they approaching it from the stream that they came through?
So, did the city pay for you to become a theory of constraints certified practitioner? I thought I saw that in your bio.
Yeah, that's a pretty affordable one. And it really
Yeah.
it came from a lot of my own, I love reading management books galore on my own personal time.
Well, neat.
And the role came with a continuous improvement component to it.
Yeah.
And a few years ago, I was given the task of putting together kind of our city's first continuous improvement plan.
Oh.
And that was coordinated among all the departments. Like I
Oh, how fun.
gathered all of the ones that the departments had, put that together in a plan, and that was given to our council. But along with that, in the continuous improvement role, I do have some responsibilities there. And I said, there are some certifications here that we can do that's very cost effective that would align with the continuous improvement role that I have. And the city did pay for that.
Oh, that is so cool.
Yeah.
Man, that work sounds so impactful.
It can be. It really can
You
be.
feel like you had more impact as where you are now or versus an auditor. Like you want to get back to auditing, but it sounds like you're having quite an impact on the city.
Well, I don't know if I'd say that I'm having quite an impact with what I'm doing right now, because it is a new thing to me and it is a new thing for the city. I almost feel like finding every brick wall that I can run into. Hating those.
All sound like we always did it that way. Why are you bothering with this? Because it's fine the way it is. Is that the way the brick wall sounds? Or
I think the brick wall was my naivete coming in from an audit position, because when you're writing a performance audit, and I don't know if you had ever seen this, like the recommendations that you give, do we ever consider what maturity level that recommendation would fall at? Because most organizations are going to go through a maturity curve.
Yep.
Right. And it was something that I learned about in this role, where I'd go, sometimes we're giving a recommendation that is, if you're looking at a traditional 5-level maturity, staircase, sometimes you're giving some of those that are at level 5, and you might be dealing with a component here that is really firefighting and is down around level 1 or 2.
Yeah. So that's the brick wall you run into.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That it was me coming in. If you're looking at developing that architecture, you're really looking at a level 3 on most maturity curves.
Mm-hmm.
And some organizations are still busy fighting fires. They aren't there yet.
Yeah. Yeah.
So then that's what really inspired the look into continuous improvement, was to go like, we get into an area and say, okay, well, we can come out and we can develop this architecture for you. And the person would say, I know that's something I should be doing. One issue that they're dealing with that they have to overcome in order to keep going up the maturity curve.
So it might be a limitation on staffing. It might be some kind of new compliance issue that they are scrambling to work on. It might be what kind of stuff are you seeing?
In government, it could be as simple as, what did the paper say about you yesterday?
Oh,
right.
Gosh, what a silly distraction, isn't it?
Well, it can be. I mean, a lot of times, what the media is talking about is symptoms that are coming from a central problem.
Mm-hmm.
Right? And the challenge as a manager is not to chase after those symptoms, but it's actually to find the root cause of, well, what is causing this? Because the root cause can cause a host of different symptoms. And if you were to deal with all those symptoms separately, you'd burn yourself out and spend way more than you'd have to if you had only found that root cause.
The public wants heads to roll.
Yeah, that's...
Or whatever. The press wants heads to roll. And so you have to placate them and then also encourage root cause diagnostics.
Yeah. And I think you're familiar with Kristen Cox and the work that she would have done in Utah, right?
Yeah.
Right. And Kristen wrote a book.
Familiar, but not like well-versed, I'd say, just familiar.
She wrote a book called Stop Decorating the Fish, which I love when you actually read the fable, what that means.
Yeah.
But she talks about this seductive 7 of like these kind of patterns that we go to in terms of how do we deal with a problem. And oftentimes the seductive 7 don't really address the problem at all, the real problem. But they look like you're trying to do something. And what you're talking about there is, she would call that more blame or more accountability. Like if I just blame somebody, it's that person's fault, that's going to solve it.
It doesn't do anything.
But so many times you can go back to that organization after that head has rolled and go, well, what's gotten better? You go, nothing, because it wasn't that person's fault. It was how the system's set up.
Yeah. We have that going on in the United States with the Veterans Administration. Every time something hits the press about a veteran not getting the right care or, having delays on getting care, the top levels of the Veteran Administration get shaved off, and then they kind of start all over again. But the real problem is that the Veterans Administration is siloed. That never gets fixed.
No.
But they keep firing people and starting again, firing people and starting again, and it doesn't really ever get anywhere. So yeah, you've seen that. Well, you want to tell us about your audit where you felt like you made a difference?
Sure. It was an audit. I think the field work would have been done for it around 2009, and it actually was delivered in public around the end of 2010.
Mm-hmm.
And it was of our animal services agency that we have in Winnipeg. And we specifically focused on bylaw enforcement. One of the issues that we found in there was like, well, really, how is the public complying with the bylaws that we have on animals, owning animals, dogs, cats, and whatnot, and how is the organization managing that? And the biggest issue that they had there was the low number of licenses that they had for dogs, which you can choose any number of ways that service is going to get paid for. In Winnipeg, a substantial component of it, I think in their own operating charter, which is public information, it does say that they're graded on bottom line performance. So they need to generate that licensing revenue so that the way where the revenue is coming in from reflects how council wanted to fund that service.
What do they expect of we call it animal control, I think, but you're calling it animal services. Okay. What are the key performance measures for that function?
I can't remember off the top of my head because it was so long ago, but essentially what they're looking at is what are the numbers of licenses that you are actually selling.
Yeah, sure.
Like the number of owners that have those licenses is a huge number, I believe. And then also what are the incidents, like how many times are you getting called out for specific kinds of calls?
Okay. An incident would be a loose dog, would be a dog that bit someone, would be...
Yeah. Could be noise complaints.
That kind of thing. Okay.
Yeah. It could be... What
they're trying to do is handle complaints, generate enough revenue to support their function. Right.
I was going to say that the value that is coming from an animal services agency is that, people are taking care of pets, but also negatively affected by somebody owns a pet, and then we don't have litigation between the owners because somebody's animal has went over and did something to somebody else's yard. What we ended up finding in that was that the number of licenses that were being sold were around 30,000-ish, and I believe that the estimation was there were about 100,000 dogs in the city. Right, so about 30%. And I don't know how that necessarily compares with other places. I think that could be successful compared to some other cities and some other ones. It's not the highest, but definitely one that they wanted to improve. And I ended up taking a look at the data of what had happened in the past through the public reports that they were getting as to what happened with their licensing numbers. And as I looked over the past, I think it was a decade or so, all of a sudden you just see it kind of go along, even keel. And then all of a sudden you see this big jump.
Oh, it jumped
in licenses.
Oh,
a big, double.
Oh,
and then all of a sudden it was, it was just going again. And then all of a sudden we had a big double again.
Oh,
I said, well, what's going on there?
Oh,
why is that happening? And I asked, well, what are the events that are happening behind this?
Yeah.
And the first time it was actually when the agency itself had been created.
Okay.
So the agency was part of the Public Works Department and it got separated out.
Okay.
And there was a lot of media coverage on, well, one, we're creating this new agency specifically for animals. And two, the fines are going up. But they're doubling or whatever the jump was there. And you had this media on it. And apparently it was lined up out the door because people didn't want to pay the fine.
Okay, good. So that was event number one.
And event number two was something similar where, okay, again, we're going to be increasing the fines. And that got published. And then all of a sudden people didn't want to pay the higher fine and they went and got their dog license.
Okay.
And then I was looking at what the trends were from when I started and from that last jump, it was kind of trailing off. And every year the agency was actually predicting, you can see it in the report, they were predicting, we're going to have this, 45-degree angle as to how many more licenses we're going to sell. And I believe that what they were saying in their reports was the strategy there was we're going to be giving value to the citizens by giving you coupons and marketing items that will accompany your license so that you can get discounts on things.
Like
And
dog
year after year,
food
it's,
or
yeah,
park membership or
things of that sort. Yeah.
okay.
But then the numbers didn't pick up from that.
Yeah.
And at the same time, the manager that was there, to his credit, was saying, like, we would like to model ourselves after Calgary. They actually are fully funded by their licenses that they sell. And we would consider them to be the diamond standard of animal services agencies across Canada.
Okay.
So I called the person who was running their animal services, and bylaw enforcement was also tied up with that. Like they had them combined, and asked them what was going on. And I remember the gentleman said to me, well, we enforce and we go to dog parks and we go to places where people walk their dogs. And we have a zero tolerance policy here. That if you're caught with a dog that doesn't have a license, you're getting a fine. And then in our recommendations, actually what we had in Winnipeg was they had a 3-strike rule. So if they came across a dog owner that didn't have a license, they'd give them a warning. They'd write down their name, and if they ever came across them again, they'd give them another warning. Like the impact of that was reflected in the numbers, right? Because it kept trailing off. And we just simply gave 2 recommendations.
And now, a word from our sponsor. Today's episode is brought to you by Yellowbook-CPE, the heroes behind the jumbo bundle of self-study courses. With a 1-year subscription, you get access to over 170 hours of top-notch CPE content. Dive into thrilling tales of agile, IT auditing, fraud, and internal controls. All courses carry NASBA's quality seal, so you know they've got the superpower of trustworthiness. Just click the link in the description to sign up. And now, back to our story.
We gave a number of recommendations in that report, but the 2 that really stick out are, 1, we have to reconsider this 3-strike policy. And as an auditor, of course, I can't tell you how to run your business, but we got to take a look at that in terms of effectiveness. And we left in the report that we had talked to Calgary. They said that they have zero tolerance. 2, there should be some kind of campaign, and you can do that very affordably. Like you can talk to radio stations or local media, and they won't charge you, but you say, like, if we are changing the policy on this, we want people to know because we don't want somebody to be fined. And that can get published very affordably without having to put a ton of money into a marketing campaign.
Yeah.
Those were the 2 recommendations that we had.
Okay.
Enforce, and then also let people know that you're enforcing.
Okay.
And if you look at the numbers of what happened after that, they virtually doubled their license sales again.
Oh, wow. To 60 out of 100-ish.
To I believe it was around mid 60-ish that they had gotten to.
What is the population of Winnipeg? Well, how many people live in Winnipeg?
We're around 750,000.
Okay.
Around there. Yeah.
Okay. And you estimated only 100,000 dogs?
That came out of an Ipsos Reid survey that had been done a few years before that.
Okay.
But it's pretty hard to estimate.
Yeah.
What are the number of dogs that you have in a city?
Yeah. Here in Austin, everybody has a dog, and they go with restaurants and shopping and airports. Dogs everywhere. Okay.
Nice. I love dogs.
You love dogs? Okay, great. So your audit had a immediate impact when they implemented your no tolerance rule,
right?
Or they reconsidered the way they were approaching it.
So what the manager at the time did was said, okay, we're going to do an amnesty campaign here, saying, like, if you don't have your dog license and you come in, we're not going to fine you for that, but we are going to implement zero tolerance so that if we do see you, you are going to be required to get your license.
Great job.
So they did both, and it did make the paper here as to, like, well, what was it like? What was successful with that? And they did credit that those 2 items was their zero tolerance that they were going to implement, and also their amnesty campaign.
Great.
And I took a look at their reports over the years. Again, what I was saying was I didn't realize what was so successful about that until I got into the business architecture role and learned a little bit about theory of constraints. And I went, I think that what we actually hit there was the constraint. And the constraint was the public's willingness to buy the license, which you can overcome in various ways. And to them,
they tried the nice approach. They tried the coupon approach and the nice approach and the 3 strikes approach, and that Didn't overcome the constraint.
No. So in theory of constraints terminology, you would say the constraint was the market. It was the people who owned dogs who weren't coming in to get their licenses.
Yeah.
For whatever reason.
Nice. How did the manager react to the recommendation when you gave it to them? Were they resistant? Were they...
I don't really know, because at that time I was still like an audit junior at that time, right? So I'm not necessarily
Okay.
I'm not the city auditor. So
Okay.
I was just a kind of a junior at that time who was given a lot of leeway in being able to actually lead audits. So how they responded to it, I don't particularly know, but I know that the gentleman still is the manager of animal services. And I talked to him years later, and he was very happy about it. He said, that was one of the best recommendations we had got.
Oh, wonderful. That's great.
I believe that they had said originally to get to 60,000 licenses they called it a pipe dream. They said it won't happen. And then to actually get there, they were very happy with it.
Oh, great. Because that sustained them and made sure that they could provide their services to the public.
One of their goals that they have is to reduce their reliance on the mill rate or like on public subsidy for their service. So that helped them get much closer to that goal.
And then talking to Calgary was a stroke of genius. How hard was that? How open were they with you? Was that hard to get them to tell you?
That's a really good thing about municipalities, is that they realize, especially with the budget limitations, that I know that like when we look at a municipality's budget, we might think that's a lot of money. And if you were to take a deep dive into like what it actually takes to run those services, you do face a lot of limitations with what you can do with that money.
Mm-hmm.
So municipalities tend to be very cooperative with each other. Like the person that I talked to was very open about.
Oh, that's really good.
How they ran their service.
Did you let him know that he ended up being a recommendation for Winnipeg's report? Did you circle back with him at all?
I didn't circle back on that one.
Yeah.
No. Well, you make me wish that I had.
Because I wonder if they have like animal service conventions and they talk to each other about it.
I don't know. Maybe.
Yeah. They might be too busy providing animal services to have a convention.
Well, the manager that we have here, the director of that agency, is he's very well known around the city. He's very well known. Like, he gets a lot of media interviews and things like that, letting people know what's going on. He's always trying to get people to come out and adopt the animals that are there. Just loves dogs. Sweet. And just a sweetheart of a guy. And he's probably one of the most passionate managers for his service that there is that you could see.
That's anything else you want to tell us about this project? That sounds like a really impactful project. Good job.
No, it was just, and I think that like the question that I would have struggled with for years later would have been when you do an audit and then you see some of those recommendations that really make a big impact, like something like that, like to double basically if you're to use theory of constraints terminology, double your throughput, or if you're double the numbers that you were doing.
Yeah.
It can be huge for a service. And then some of the recommendations that you give, you go, I don't necessarily know if they did that much.
Yeah.
Other than theoretically, I'm covering risks and I'm making some recommendations on controls.
Mm-hmm.
And some of the ones that I would have made in the past, I'd probably go back and look and go, did I actually create red tape with some of the stuff that I've recommended in the past?
Oh, that's such a great thing to say. That is such a insightful thing because, we end up as oftentimes creating bureaucracy and making things harder.
Right.
And throwing in constraints. Yeah.
And that's where I appreciated being able to have that other perspective on, now if I was to go back and look at a recommendation that I would give, I'd make sure that this is not just a red tape recommendation.
Sure.
This is actually something that's going to make a difference in the areas that it needs to make a difference.
Oh, well, I hope you do come back to audit so that you can do more good work and having that well-rounded perspective.
Yeah.
Because, a lot of times we enter auditing straight out of college and we don't have the perspective of operations. We've never had to create or run a business. And so we're not as wise, I guess, as we should be.
It certainly poses a lot of questions for me if I read an audit report and then it says, okay, we have assessed you, we've done this audit, and we have a number of recommendations for you.
Okay.
And then it also says, but we didn't actually look at your operations. And the question I have is, how can we make a recommendation that improves operations and not have actually looked at the operations? The best answer I can come up with is we're giving theoretical recommendations.
Yeah.
Which can, in terms of audit risk, can have such a huge variability on whether it's going to improve operations or not.
Yeah. Sometimes auditors just approach things from a compliance standpoint, just checking the box, right? Without having to understand who they're working with.
So I was going to say, that's what I really appreciate about the articles that you write and you're doing your show The Sample, when you will actually challenge, like it's an amicable challenge to auditors to say, let's meet a higher standard. I sincerely appreciate that.
Oh, good. Thank you.
Because I would say if I'm looking at that, if I'm giving a theoretical recommendation, I am assuming that the control that I'm giving is going to work, but I might not have actually any evidence about that.
Yeah.
It's just an assumption.
Yeah.
And not only that the people that have to implement it are going to do it the right way.
Oh, gosh, that's a whole other conversation, right?
Because they would know how to do it the right way.
Yeah. Right.
But if they knew how to do it the right way, then why didn't they do it already?
Right. Yeah. Gosh, there's so many questions. There's so many different paths this conversation, your diagnostics can take. And I think sometimes auditors, as you know, have a time constraint and they have a finite objective. Did you comply with the contract? Did you comply with these grant terms and conditions? Are your financials accurate? Whatever it is. And they just hone in on that, which does help them get the project done. There's a lot to that. But then they end up nitpicking and making things worse by adding to the bureaucracy because they don't understand how what they're recommending ripples.
I think there's some definite cognitive traps there. And one of them for an auditor is
traps.
I need to have a criteria to audit against. A lot of the times that criteria can be a policy. But what if the policy's wrong? What if the policy is actually the bottleneck?
Right. What if the policy is the bottleneck?
And we don't end up looking at that.
Yeah.
And the policy could be the reason that performance is not where we want it to be. And the policy actually has to change. But then now how do you deal with that as an auditor? Because you're going, but that's my criteria.
Yeah. Well, your policy, that 3 strikes policy was a constraint.
Right.
Yeah.
So one way you could go with that is to say, well, you have to hire a whole bunch of people and actually get more people out there so that you find more so that you can get to 3 strikes faster. And that would have been a complete waste of money. Right?
Oh, yeah, that would have been ridiculous. But that does sound very governmental.
It could be, yeah.
Yeah.
So to actually, I think that's something that auditors have to struggle with, is because a lot of them will say, well, I don't want to actually address the policy because the policy is my criteria. Or it could make the wrong people mad if I take a look at the policy. Right now I'm creating conflict.
Yeah.
And then what do you do with that? So sometimes you'll just stick with the policy and say, well, you have to follow that policy.
Yeah.
The policy is unquestionable.
Having to ask, why are you doing what you're doing? That's a tough one because you end up speaking to a different audience. Your report gets directed to someone else. So it's not directed to the auditee. Now it's directed to the legislature, or a governing body. And auditors are not comfortable doing that. But sometimes that's where things need to get fixed.
That's why I do.
Yeah.
I think that's why I did like theory of constraints, because theory of constraints does give you the tools to deal with conflict. And you'll hear it from other management authors too about having to deal with productive conflict or dealing with a conflict. Whereas a lot of people will say conflict is just wrong. So, well, conflict is not wrong. How do we address it? And maybe we don't trust ourselves to be able to respect the other person and still have that conversation and get to the issue rather than get into people issues. Yeah.
That sounds like politics in America right now. Are you guys having a good time watching us here?
I know that people are definitely, as time goes on, we tend to get more divided, right? But yeah, we do leave those conversations by the wayside and be able to have respectful disagreements.
Yeah.
I heard it on an interview the other day too. Someone asked somebody, like in another country, are you paying attention to U.S. politics? And their answer was great. They said everybody outside of the U.S. pays attention to U.S. politics.
Because we're just so entertaining.
It's no different here.
Talk about not listening to each other or not being able to tolerate ambiguity or not having the right answer. We're not good at that. It's black or white.
Yeah. I don't think it's always been that way.
Yeah.
Maybe we've lost something along the way.
And it's hard to say. Can't tell. Well, you're a very deep thinker, and this was a fascinating conversation. I could probably talk to you all day. But I know that you need to go back to work, and I am very thankful that you were on the podcast with us. Thank you so much.
It was a huge honor to have you to ask me to be on here. I kind of wondered why I'm just a small town kid working in a little bit bigger of a municipality, and I appreciate it. I appreciate the conversations that we've had.
Yeah.
Behind the scenes too.
Oh, thank you so much. Well, auditors are heroes, in small town or not. I mean, you're making a big difference there in Winnipeg with your work. So thank you for that.
Thank you, brave listeners, for joining us on this adventure. We appreciate your loyalty. Take a moment to subscribe and share this podcast with all your audit allies. And don't miss out on Yellowbook-CPE's upcoming webinars. Because every superhero needs their training, and Yellowbook-CPE offers continuing education that's relevant, convenient, and as thrilling as the fight for justice. Until next time, audit on!